Welcome everyone back to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. I want to thank everyone for joining us back at the show this week. This week's show is going to be just a current events reading show. I've done my best to take a really in-depth look at some of the good things as well as some of the potential pitfalls for this week. I'm hoping all my listeners at Time Monk Radio, Heathen Radio Network, UK Pagan Network, and the YouTube archives, I hope you'll enjoy this show a great deal. In the coming new year, hopefully there'll be some changes and a few more interviews here. If you missed last week's Yuletide interview with Kveldoffer Gunderson, you could still listen to that either in the YouTube archives or via my site. But for this week, I just kind of like to get started. So let's all drop a chair in the virtual reading room. There's a fire in the hearth. The candles are lit. The tea is just as you like it. And we'll continue with our reading right after these short messages. All the music used on the show today is from musicalley.com, your source for free-to-air music for podcasts. The artists place their music up for free to air in hopes that you, the listener, will visit their site and purchase some of their outstanding musical offerings. So after the show, why not visit musicalley.com and explore their extensive playlist?
And she sings, she goes home in the evening with the dew all on her wings.
Do you have questions? The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com, for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
And see from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland. See from beneath the sea, the best in all of Ireland.
So this week, for our reading, I decided that I would word the question this way. What are the most likely energies and or events coming up for the week December 9th through 14th, 2013? And let's see what we've got here. Well, tonight's cards are immediately interesting to me for two reasons. The first is because before I even shuffled and laid out these cards, I had wondered if the first or one of the first cards was going to be the Sage. Now, why did I do that? It was the card on the card of the day, the first day that Nelson Mandela suffered a really serious hospitalization. In fact, he was so ill, this was a few months ago, that a lot of people weren't even sure whether he was alive or not. And at the time, I had to spend a lot of time on my blog and outside the blog explaining to people that my referring to Mr. Mandela as being the target of the Sage card was not a political statement on my part, or even one from the cards themselves. It's because the cards like to work on symbols. And there are a lot of people out there, especially in his own country, and as we've seen from words pouring in the press all over the world, they do see Mr. Mandela as a symbolic wise old man, someone sharing his wisdom and making history at the same time, just like the sage is writing in the book on his desk. He's writing for the future. It doesn't matter what the actual reality of what he did or didn't do. It's a symbol thing, and that's why I think that he's a very large energy on this card, and I did really shuffle the deck. I didn't look at them first, but just as I suspected, here he is. As the number one overarching energy affecting current events this week, or at least the outward manifestation of current events for this week. As we'll see later, there's some other things going on. But with his funeral this coming weekend, that makes perfect sense that a lot of the official eyes and the official news is just going to be about this important political cultural event. It is a sort of focusing time with the largest public funeral since Churchill, according to one thing I read. So it is just going to kind of be out there in the energy stream. And again, it doesn't matter about what you think about the man, his acts, or even his legacy. The point is that his passing is going to focus everything. And those of us who follow current events need to keep that in mind and kind of keep an eye on it, because it can be both compelling and distracting in some ways. You know, it's a great way to cover other events that maybe for some reason the powers that be don't want out there as much. For example, in England was being battered by the worst storms and storm surges since 1953 the other night. I mean, houses were being destroyed, rivers were flooding, coastal areas were being inundated. And what did we have on most of the networks, particularly on the TV streams? Apparently we had the death of Nelson Mandela, which is important. But as one of my friends pointed out on Facebook, any other time, you would just be seeing endless footage of these storms. And instead, it was almost like they weren't happening. And again, they did affect primarily people on the coast, but that isn't the point. The point is that a big story like that can be used both because it's a big story, but also as a distraction. Okay, now the second reason I found these cards interesting is because this past Friday, when I did my blog reading for the weekend, the Cat's Eye Devil card, which usually means temptations, or the temptation to simply focus on a physical pleasure, was one of the major cards for this past weekend. It also was contrasted with the libido card, which is sexuality and distraction in the side card deck. So we had basically the generally negative indications of the temptations card, and then we had them sort of bringing forward the negative aspects of the libido card, which has a lot of positive aspects, but when it's negative, it can also be on this distraction from danger. So this past weekend, the experience of the building energy was already started, and it's just continuing now to manifest in the coming week. More on this later, but keep in mind, this is an ongoing process. It's not new, except it did sort of kind of come into focus last week, but it just seemed to be building. But for now, let's go back and break this down in a better way, and then we can return once more to kind of what I think was the larger picture. As I mentioned, the first card is the Sage. This is an old man seated at a desk, surrounded by books, and he's writing his wisdom for future generations in his own little book on the desk. In addition to being about a particular person, in this case I'm pretty sure the card, as I said, does stand for Mandela, and the world's focus on his recent demise. But it also indicates wisdom in study, or perhaps a need for both. That may indeed be the other major energy of this week, or one of them. Expect stories about education, elderly people, authors and writers, reporters, anything concerning either knowledge or study may be in the news this week, also wisdom and studying. On the downside, this could be about older people, male or female, or those who hold positions where they should be wise or not. Not that there's a problem with older people, but older people can be very conservative. In general, young people like to be very active in doing things, but older people kind of naturally move towards restraint and the older ways of doing things that they're familiar with, usually, not always. Now, there's nothing wrong with being old. That's not a problem. I'm getting up there myself. I'm not really in old age yet, but I understand this tendency to prefer to do things the way you're familiar with rather than just leaping off a cliff like I would have at 20 to anything that sounded new. But depending on the world situation, this caution to look to, say, the old ways can either be really sage advice, a really, really good thing, or sometimes it's a step backwards to something that really, a solution doesn't really fit anymore. Neither option is right or wrong. It's all about the context in which we find these things. So let's get some more on our context. Let's get some more cards. Well, next we have the Warrior card. And we have gotten the Warrior quite a lot, both in the blog and in the show readings recently. As I said before, this is a card with a young man dressed in shining armor who stands watch over a medieval battle camp. He's facing outward from the camp, and his sword's been drawn, but it's pointed downward in the defensive position. He's ready for battle, but he's not going out seeking it either. He's waiting for it to come to him, if it does. And in a personal reading for a client, I find this is often the card of someone's romantic interest. They're a tall, dark, handsome stranger, or someone with a compatible personality in the client's life. Someone who they're literally doing emotional battle with, generally. It can also signify that a person needs to find their own strong inner warrior, because perhaps battles or conflicts may come their way, and they need to protect themselves from something. And this tells them basically to put on their armor and get ready and sort of, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. In a current events reading here, like this one, the warrior, like the sage, occasionally is an individual person. It could be a strong ruler, a dictator, a soldier, perhaps even a crusading activist or a business person. But, well, I think this could be more than of the same person. In other words, the warrior or conflicted sides of Mr. Mandela's legacy. I mean, we all know about that. But I think there's more to this. And I think that's true both in South Africa as well as the rest of the world. I'm saying for South Africa, it's not usually a place I read for. But the cards seem to be focusing there a bit this week, and that's natural, because that's where the world energy is focused to a degree. This card may not be just about historical conflicts or Mandela's own personal past, but a warning that battles or even all-out warfare could erupt there. In other parts of the world, this card, the warrior, suggests that conflicts, battles, and strong men or women may all be in the news this week. And in some places, they're going to affect people where they live, or at least start making an emotional impact wider than in the past. And I think this is especially true in the industrialized West, and also in other places where conflicts or direct conflicts have not existed for a while, but could be heating up. Again, the warrior or conflict isn't always about physical warfare, but can also be about any tense, combative situation between two or multiple forces, including things like diplomatic rows. We've said this before when this card has come up numerous times. Diplomacy is war by other means. It's when nations, instead of getting their guns out, send their diplomats in and they yell at each other or they discuss things. You can also have political infighting, in social unrest, or often taking the form of protests, not just social unrest in terms of riots, although that's possible, but also just protesting and general unease. Corporations that are seriously competitive against each other and having, business deals going, like war over a best-selling book, or a book that's expected to be a bestseller, and trying to get the author. That's a competition. And of course, there's the realm of sports and games, which I don't talk about as much because I'm not a big sports fan, but it's a very popular way of sort of supplementing warring or conflict energies into something that could even be fairly positive. Now, some of this conflicting energy may be economic, and it might involve housing or the housing market in some way, at least in the US or possibly in Europe. That's because the next card is the home card. Now, this is that card with the lovely kitchen with a burning fire in the fireplace. There's a cat sleeping on the mat. There's a table set for a meal. It's very homey. It represents both the physical and the spiritual home that we live in, the safe place, our safe place. But also, by extension, the idea of the homeland or the nation. Which is why I suggested earlier that a part of this reading may be a warning that South Africa, or even that region of the world, is standing on the edge of possible warfare or conflict in their homeland. Hopefully, this warfare can be restrained to the political arena. And as that country and its neighbors struggle with the new reality and reshuffle themselves to face the next chapters in their existence, whatever they are, hopefully they will be able to sort this in a non-violent, non-actually physically aggressive manner. But I get the strong feeling there's kind of a slippery edge to all this that could tip either way. And this is some of what the rest of the world will be watching over this coming week. They're mostly going to be watching from the sidelines, although a lot of leaders are going to actually be in the area on the weekend, which again focuses a lot of stuff there. But I suspect that this energy is probably just building now. I don't think it's actually as likely to express itself immediately, although it could. I don't think this energy is restrained to South Africa, though, by any means. And to put a positive light on the first three cards, individual people and certain countries and wise leaders could use this energy in another fashion. They can use the energies for wisdom, defense, and the home or the homeland to arrange things in a prudent fashion. when similar energies have shown up in the past on my blog, I've quoted the late President Reagan's famous words, trust but verify. And there's a lot of that energy here for both individuals and people. But a lot of people concentrate on the verify of that, but they don't take into account the trust. So you need to kind of have both for this to be successful and positive. On the downside, this reading also warns us that the idea of defense of the homeland needs to be used with wisdom and with a sense of historical perspective. Something that I fear has been greatly lacking, especially in the United States in the last few years. But in some other countries, like the UK and some other places, it's been going on as well. This is not just a US problem, though it's a US-inspired problem, I think, to some degree. When countries feel threatened, they can literally go on the defensive and start looking at the old ways, becoming a bit more conservative, especially at home. Again, this is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how it is utilized and how it influences, but it's definitely a track, and I'm feeling a strong pull towards this in the Eastern world of Japan and China, with some hints of India and the Middle East as well, but especially in Japan. I think we're probably going to hear more stories about the remilitarization and, looking at the old writings and, again, looking at the old wisdom. Japan has lots and lots and lots of ancient records for inspiration and perhaps even ways that they want to try to kind of restructure their post-war society. That's going to be interesting, especially with the kind of, again, that sort of tension and building conflict there that's forcing both sides to kind of reflect on their situation and what they want for their future. China, on the other hand, seems to be looking into this sort of back to their empire period, or in just periods in between some of their empire periods when they were more expansive, when they were sort of building empires. And, they're getting kind of feisty. And this is playing out both in the world and in the realm of outer space. So again, you have both this newness, this wanting to reach out, but also based on kind of an old model. So worldwide this week, there's likely to be some strong nostalgia for these old ways everywhere. Defending things and perhaps the way things are organized, not just in Japan and China, but again, look for it everywhere. This is neither good or bad, but everyone needs to be careful not to use yesterday's defenses to fight today's battles, both the literal ones in the battlefield and the ones thrashed out in other arenas, even in your workplace, for example. Otherwise, I glimpse the potential for a repeat of the kind of thinking that had brave officers leading romantic cavalry charges into the range of metal tanks and other fearsome weaponry in the First World War. They were basically fighting the previous war with the current war as weapons. And you really don't want to do that, whether you were a labor representative trying to negotiate with, say, a city that's going into administration or bankruptcy, or whether you're an officer on the battlefield. You want to have today's weapons for today's war. Things have changed to a degree, and again, that wisdom needs to be used to operate in an effective manner. Now, that's the first three side cards. But how do they do when combined with our new Cat's Eye Tarot deck? Once again, I just chose two of them. I'm still getting to know the deck, and I want to learning as I'm going with the rest of us. But I mentioned the first one is the Devil or the Temptation card. But the second one is its mere opposite of Temperance, which is really fascinating. They're both major arcana cards, again, as I discussed last week. Major arcana is not that they're more important cards exactly, but they tend to, in the standard tarot, be the more powerful and archetypal ones. They're more sharp in their images. So we've got two major arcana cards, and we've got the two complete opposite ones. Again, this is really similar to last Friday's blog reading, except there, what we got when we looked at the card of the day, and you can see that for the December 6th, 2013 weekend edition if you want to go read it. But the summary is that most of that past weekend's energy was a very strong pull on many people towards distraction, overstimulation, and the concentration on brief physical pleasure. And that was a double reading with both the libido card and the devil card or the temptation card together. They were right there with a dice cup rune or the fate rune, and it almost gave the impression of people being tempted to just divert themselves or party on like it's 1999 as much as possible until the dice rolled or fate intervenes to stop the party. Wednesday's blog on December 4th, when I did not read on Thursday the 5th, so it basically goes Wednesday, Friday, was about the looming destruction of compassion and a growing hardness that seemed to be occurring on the part of many in the industrialized world. Something that often happens during hard times when they go on for a long while, but it can result, sadly, in a lack of charity and mercy in a society. As I explained on Wednesday, people and energies tend to swing to extremes back and forth. But energies will always try to find balance, which is what that second temperance card is all about. But human beings never quite get it right. We just can't. Not while we're on Earth anyway. But when societies swing too far one way or too far the other, serious emotional and cultural and even just economic, all kinds of imbalances can occur. The kitties here on the temperance card, they're happily sleeping, snuggled up together. They look really cute. They look like a yin-yang symbol. It's a black cat and a white cat, snuggled together, but they're on a really high marble balcony. It looks like it's above the sea in some place like, Santa Cruz, California, or maybe in ancient Greece. And they're doing what cats do. They're just sleeping up really high and just really comfortable in this really dangerous, sort of perfectly balanced place, because they're perfectly safe as long as they stay totally balanced and snuggled up together. But if something happens to startle them and one cat reacts and suddenly their bodies lose their footing for some reason, one or both of those kitties could fall off and meet with a terrible accident or even death on the rocks below. I mean, it's a really precarious position, but not if the cats are balanced. Now, that card that comes before the temperance card, though, is the devil card. And the devil kitty isn't really about the Christian idea of Lucifer in cat form, nearly so much as it is the card about how easy it is for both cats and people to become so involved in basically actions that are quickly comforting, transitory, and often physical, that they forget that there's more to life and ignore the greater mental and spiritual worlds and that world of both human and inner cat interaction that is really important if you're going to be a complete human being. The kitty on the card is a really fat, gray tabby kitty. This poor kitty obviously has some food issues. I had a cat very much like this one who was orange. My beloved big guy, who I affectionately called the Great Pumpkin, could only have his eating controlled if you put his friend's food up on a counter because he was too fat to jump up that high. But when he came to his own food dish, which was filled occasionally, obviously he needed to eat, he got kind of confused. You could pick my cat up and you had a very loving cat. He enjoyed petting immensely. In fact, it was probably one of his favorite things other than eating. However, he had this kind of odd quirk. He sort of had his wires crossed. Because when he got really, really happy and excited and being petted and loving, he would jump down from your lap, run to his food dish, and eat a few bites purring. And then he'd run back, jump on your lap for more petting, and then it was rinse repeat. He'd run back to the food bowl, eat a few more bites. It was obvious that to the cat, total ecstasy was a combination of this loving interaction that he'd somehow gotten confused with food. And if a person or even his other friend cat wasn't around, he would simply eat as sort of a substitute for having the human or the inner cat interaction. And a lot of people do this too. I mean, you've seen it's what they call comfort eating. And comfort eating on its own, again, there's nothing wrong with it when it's just, a celebratory family meal at Yule or your birthday or a big feast because it's, you just feel like making this great big meal and have your friends over. Or even if you just want to sit down and have a bowl of mashed potatoes, hot mashed potatoes and gravy by yourself with a book because, well, you can. It's fine occasionally, but it becomes an issue when the bodily pleasures of eating the good food becomes not an occasional reward we give our hearts and our bodies, but an end in itself or even a substitution for the real expression of human or human-cat interaction. Now, because this is a cat deck, I'm sure that the veterinarian Dr. Given, who illustrated and created this deck, has seen a good many cats with this issue in her practice. It's not uncommon, just like it isn't uncommon with people. The bodily pleasure that becomes focused to the exclusion of most of the rest of life is food for cats. But with humans, this can be any activity that's momentarily pleasurable, usually something very physical like sex, eating, drinking, taking recreational drugs to excess, television to excess, computer games to excess, sports, or even some hobbies that are maybe wonderful in themselves, but they can become dangerously distractive or even addictive if a person just accepts that temptation to let them pretty much take over their life and do nothing else, and especially not interact with other human beings, unless perhaps it's in cyberspace. In a worldwide sense, the energies of last week and moving on this week suggest a building tension energy-wise between this human temptation towards excess and distraction and the desperate need for balance and restraint right now. One thing the Temperance card can signify in a private reading is that an individual has just gone too far. They're out on a limb in their opinions or their ideas. They need to make their way back to the middle ground in some way. Their life has just become too extreme, and they need to remember how to compromise, and they need to sort of, come back to square one before they literally fall off the edge of that gate above the sea. That is the great wisdom or sage advice in the face of what appears to be a lot of conflicting and battle-oriented energies that we've seen not just tonight, but have been seeing for the last couple of years, but particularly the last few weeks and months. The temptation will be there to ignore this, though, and just return to the middle. For most people, they're just going to want to stay defensive and distracted, which could result in some serious bad things happening. But if people, tribes, and nations could concentrate on a balanced energy and get their own individual and collective spiritual, mental homes and homelands back in some sort of regularized state, then joy and moving forward is possible. That is the good news of this reading. That is the optimistic part of this reading. That's because the very last part of this reading, where we have the runes, those ancient runes that are so sort of archetypal and really deep energies, they offer the potential for a lot of hope, while at the same time repeating the same warning of the greatest danger that lies right now. The first rune is Pethro, which means joy and celebration. It's a great rune. I'd love to see this rune in readings. Except we have to remember that this is joy in a northern, somewhat Viking cultural context. On the one hand, we have the Northerners celebrating joy in the family, the kin network, the homeland card. I have a deck of rune cards that's basically very much like, it's the same as the runes, except somebody's illustrated them, and they're cards instead of pieces of wood or stone or metal that you throw or lay down. And the Wunyo card for that deck, it's basically a big Viking clan sitting at a feast table with a horn with all the generations together, with lots of food and lots of joy. Again, that celebratory feeding of the body, but also feeding the spirits and interacting with people together. But we also have the Viking joy and the battle flag, or joy in battle and conflict. I mean, you probably heard the joy of the battle, and that's what this is, or berserking. Vikings loved all sorts of battles. And they weren't competitive just in physical warfare, though. They also expressed their very competitive culture in things like riddle games, poetry contests, board games, really serious sports. Hunting, including big game hunting, both with, on foot and on horses and all kinds of ways. Horse racing, and even things like lawsuits. The Vikings, particularly in Iceland, they were really hot. They make America look normal in that sense. I mean, they're when you read some of the Icelandic sagas, it's like almost like reading a script for a Hollywood movie about, modern day Los Angeles courtrooms or something, because people were always suing each other. And they even recognized that a battle between two people, when it couldn't be stopped, say, by a lawsuit, didn't have to destroy the entire clan, because, you want to keep things calm and the family together as much as possible, and even the war band for that matter. So they had a form of ritual warfare that allowed two individuals to fight each other, even to the death sometimes, but it discouraged others from being involved other than watching and making sure the proper rituals were observed. Of course, sometimes people being people, blood feuds and other things might occur that grow out of the results of the holmganger, which is what the ritual fight was called. But during it, both sides would have to agree to let the two individuals duke it out between themselves. If you've ever seen the movie The 13th Warrior, which does have its problems, but has some absolutely wonderful scenes, it mixed in with a fantasy. And there is a great and really historically pretty accurate example of just such a holmganger, and shows how the conflicts could be restrained by this tradition and custom to the two people involved, thus allowing the rest of the group to stop being distracted when it was over, and they could stop, taking sides, and get back to defending the homestead, which is what they were supposed to be doing in the first place, which was guarding things, and the tension got real high, and two guys got mad at each other, and they just got to duke it out, well, under this very restricted and very tradition-bound system. Well, I can't think of an exact way to duplicate such a duel on an international level, to sort of like let the individuals that really want to get at each other, or the two countries, or whatever, duke it out. The cards seem to indicate that joy might be found if such conflicts can either be resolved in an alternative way. Somehow I really don't see a poetry contest between maybe China and Japan, but it's that sort of on a psychic level or an energy level sort of way of finding another way to maybe compete. You can at least localize them from not directly fighting it out on everybody else's territory. In other words, it's like trying to, at the very least, localize the conflict to the people or the nations who wish to fight it out, rather than getting everybody else involved. And that's going to be kind of tricky. Finally, we have the Rido rune, or riding. This rune is pretty obviously about travel. It's about horse riding in specific, but the travel can be spiritual as well. It doesn't have to be physical. And this is why I suggested the world might even manage to move forward in joy, that kind of spiritual or mental moving forward, or at least in less sorrow or less unhappiness in the next while, if balance can be pulled back into place, if the world can step back from this almost headlong ride into fanaticism and extremism and pull back towards the center, there could be really joy there. But it can also be about real travel, trips, methods of travel like airplanes, cars, trains, freeways, even spaceships and submarines. It's just like travel in general. When this rune shows up in a reading like this, it suggests both that things may move pretty quickly in a symbolic way, like, fast-moving events, basically. But this time of year, it's also likely about just plain travel, especially in the Northern Hemisphere. My sense is that disrupted travel may be in the news a lot this week again, possibly and probably weather-related. And while I don't have to be a psychic to predict that in mid-December, this rune concentrates more energy on it, making it likely to be a strong meme when it occurs. And we've already seen some of this in the United States, and it makes me wonder. I don't really see any weather runes here in this reading, but I do have to wonder if maybe a lesser energy, maybe a weather event or an ongoing weather event that just complicates things. There may also be some serious stories about all forms of transportation, roads, again, or even the space race, which, there has been things already in the news about, rumors about China's Death Star and base on the moon and different things coming out of Russia and India. So we've had these ongoing stories. Just look for them to continue. Hopefully, this rune is all about moving forward in a positive way, which no matter what the world at large chooses to do, you, the individual, have actually a lot of energy this week helping you do that. For one thing, we can easily see what the major energy issue of this time period is, and it's probably not just this week. This seems to be a period when we're moving into a time when the goal is to avoid the temptation to concentrate solely on behaviors that are totally selfish and transitory, to the exclusion of balancing them with activities that are charitable, compassionate, outreaching, and have us acting as loving human beings, both as people we know and basically with our opinions. This isn't about dropping $10 in a charity kettle. It's about not allowing yourself to be caught up unwittingly in a cultural and energy trend that seems to be encouraging people to look only out for number one and to stay focused on this, and that seems to be and focusing on things that bring relief and instant distractions and gratification from the real issues. Again, Nothing wrong with taking care of yourself and your family. Like all things that can be taken to extreme, there is some truth in this particular energy. It's when it gets taken another step further and gets unbalanced that it becomes a problem. It's also worth remembering that there's more to life than just the body. And the physical senses of fun or even playing World of Warcraft, that we need to remember that interacting with others in a positive, physical, and non-defensive way is really urgent right now. So that even if most of your contacts, like mine right now, are actually online, you can choose to either have that be a real contact with people that you really know, or just kind of keep it superficial. And there's a lot of temptation to keep things superficial right now, and just concentrate on the things that basically that entertain us. Balance in the face of a world seemingly bent on a fast race towards the extreme edges may be easier said than done now. But the runes do promise joy to those who seek this path. But they also suggest that there's some battles and conflicts riding towards those who refuse to do this. Basically, you stay out on the extreme edges, refuse to do some personal reflection, refuse to decide, even if you want to keep an extreme view, why am I holding this? Let me really look at it. Let me take it apart. Let me think it over. You're going to be heading down a very difficult road. So at least there's some hopeful news, though, for those able to listen and take heed this week. And that's some great news all by itself. Because, we've had so much doom. It is really good to see a rune like joy as one of the last two things in the reading. I just, I really want to say, and of course it goes kind of with the season too. This is a time when people are concentrating on either being happy or trying to be happy. And that, trying to be happy usually doesn't work very well. But if we sit down and maybe study and use some wisdom and take heed of some of these things, maybe we will start to find some joy in our family and our joy in our clan and in our friends and our situation, which can be a good distraction from some of the things that are going on outside that we can't do anything about, as opposed to these kind of, the temptation to just kind of these like non-really satisfying distractions that don't do very much. But I want to thank you all for taking time to listen tonight. As I said in a few previous shows, I'm hoping to expand to more interviews and do more than just the current events reading in the new year. But like most people, I'm finding December a really busy time. Also, we've had some things at the house where our well went dry and I had to get our water connected, and it's been a really big mess, so I haven't had as much time or energy as I'd like to put into the show. So I'll probably wait until January to really stir things up and get this new format sorted out. But I have been talking to people, and I'm working on getting some help with the outside interviews and things, getting them recorded. And once we get those technical details sorted out, we can hopefully have some more interviews. Meanwhile, if you missed last week's fantastic hour-long interview with Kavildolfr Gunderson, where he talked about Yule beliefs and traditions in the North, and again tells a few stories, and it's a lot of fun, you can still listen either via the Time Monk Radio archives or via the link I'll have posted at my site. But I hope for now that you enjoyed this week's show and find it extremely helpful in going forward in your own life. I know sometimes just knowing what the energies are is really helpful for me. But for now, I want to thank you all for coming, and please join us again next time for Cat's Eye on the Future.
But here's a health to the company and one to my lass.
You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a glimpse of the energies coming soon into your world and into your future. Be sure to join us again next time when we explore another chapter of Cat's Eye on the Future.
Again. But here's a health to the company and one to my last. Let's drink and be merry all out of one glass. Let's drink and be merry, all grief to refrain, for we may, it might never all meet.